The crowd roared as Zektar stepped into the massive arena. Lights flashed from every direction, making his blue scales shine like metal. He was huge, standing nearly 8 feet tall with muscles that bulged under his thick skin. 4 powerful arms stretched out from his shoulders, each one ending in claws that could cut through steel. His yellow eyes glowed with confidence as he looked around at the thousands of beings watching from the seats above. This was the Galactic Combat Arena, the most famous fighting place in known space. Creatures from hundreds of different worlds came here to watch the best fighters battle each other. For 3 long years, Zektar had been the champion. No one had been able to beat him. Not the rock-hard granite warriors from Stonex Prime. Not the lightning-fast blur dancers from the speed planet Velocity. Not even the mind-reading psychic strikers from the thought worlds. Zektar was a Kethron, and his people were born to fight. Their homeworld was harsh and dangerous, full of predators with razor teeth and poison claws. Only the strongest survived, to have children. Generation after generation, the Kethran had become perfect fighting machines. They were fast, strong, and smart in battle. When other species saw a Kethran warrior, they usually just gave up without fighting. The announcer's voice boomed across the arena. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all kinds, today we have a special match. Our champion Zektar the Blade will face a new challenger from a species that just joined our league." Zektar grinned, showing rows of sharp teeth. A new species meant easy prey. He had fought newcomers before. They were always so excited to prove themselves, but they never understood what real fighting was about. This would be over quickly, and then he could go back to his luxury suite and plan his next vacation. From the small world called Earth, please welcome Lisa Carter. The crowd went quiet. Many beings had heard rumors about humans, but most had never seen one before. Zektar looked toward the other entrance and started laughing before his opponent even appeared. A human female walked into the arena, and Zektar could not believe what he was seeing. She was tiny, barely reaching his chest if she stood on her toes. Her skin was soft and pink without any natural armor or scales. She had only 2 arms, and they looked weak compared to his 4 powerful limbs. Her teeth were flat and dull, useless for tearing flesh. Her nails were short and rounded, nothing like his razor claws. This was supposed to be a warrior? This creature looked like it should be hiding in caves, eating plants and running from real predators. Zektar had heard stories about humans being tough fighters, but those stories must have been jokes or lies. Lisa Carter wore simple fighting gear that looked cheap and basic. She carried the standard plasma blade that all fighters were allowed to use, but she held it like she barely knew which end was dangerous. Her brown hair was tied back in a simple knot, and her brown eyes looked calm but not fierce. She did not snarl or roar or make any sound at all. Zektar decided to have some fun with this pathetic opponent. He raised all 4 arms above his head and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is what the famous human species sends to fight me." His voice carried easily across the huge arena. "I have heard tales of their so-called warrior spirit, but I see only weakness standing before me. Maybe they should have sent their children instead. At least younglings might put up some kind of fight." The crowd reacted in different ways. Some aliens laughed and cheered, enjoying the champion's confidence. Others stayed quiet, not sure what to think. The few humans in the audience sat still and watched without showing emotion. Zektar thought they looked scared or maybe just sad that their fighter was about to be destroyed. Lisa Carter stepped forward and looked directly into his yellow eyes. She did not seem afraid or angry. Her voice was quiet but clear when she spoke. "We did not come here to boast, Zektar. We came to compete. May the best fighter win." Her calm words only made Zektar laugh harder. Best fighter? There was no competition here. This would be like a mountain fighting a pebble, or an ocean fighting a drop of water. He was amazed that the humans had been foolish enough to send this weak creature to face him. "Tell me, little human," Zektar said, walking closer to tower over her. "What do you eat on your world? Grass, berries? You look like prey, not a predator. Do you even know how to use that blade you carry?" Lisa did not back away as he approached. "I know enough," she said simply. The crowd was getting excited now. Many had never seen their champion toy with an opponent like this before. Usually fights started quickly and ended even faster. But Zektar was clearly enjoying himself, and the audience loved the show. I have conquered fighters from 12 different worlds, Zektar continued, flexing his muscles for effect. I have broken warriors who were twice your size and 10 times stronger. I have defeated creatures with poison blood, electric skin, and minds that could crush thoughts. What could a soft little thing like you possibly do to challenge me? Lisa tilted her head slightly like she was thinking about his question. I guess we will find out tomorrow, she said. Her simple answer frustrated Zektar. He wanted her to get angry, to make threats, to show some kind of warrior spirit. Instead, she just stood there looking at him like he was a puzzle she was trying to solve. It was not the reaction he expected from someone who was about to be humiliated in front of millions of viewers. The betting booths around the arena were going crazy. The odds against the human were 50-1, the worst in championship history. Some gambling houses were not even taking bets, saying the match was too one-sided to be interesting. A few humans tried to place bets on their fighter, but most bookmakers just laughed at them. As the presentation continued, Zektar learned more about his opponent. Lisa Carter was 28 years old and came from a place called Colorado on Earth. She had trained in something called mixed martial arts and had won some competitions on her home world. But the descriptions of human fighting sounded like children playing games compared to real galactic combat. The technical briefing was even more laughable. Humans could only see a tiny part of the light spectrum. Their hearing was limited to a narrow range of sounds. They had no natural weapons, no armor, no poison, no special abilities at all. They were not even particularly strong or fast compared to other species. The briefing made them sound like the weakest creatures in known space. When the presentation ended, both fighters were supposed to make final statements. Zektar went first, raising his voice so everyone could hear. Tomorrow, I will show you all why the Kethron are the greatest warriors in the galaxy. This human will learn what real fighting means. Though I promise to end her suffering quickly. The crowd cheered and stomped their feet. Zektar basked in their approval, already imagining how easy his victory would be. Then it was Lisa's turn to speak. She walked to the center of the arena and looked up at the thousands of beings watching her. When she spoke, her voice was not loud, but somehow everyone could hear every word clearly. I am honored to represent humanity in this competition. Win or lose, I will give everything I have. That is what humans do. The arena fell silent after her words. There was something in her tone that made even the loudest spectators pause. It was not fear or anger or boasting. It was something else, something that Zektar did not recognize or understand. As they left the arena, Zektar felt more confident than ever. Tomorrow would be the easiest fight of his career. He would barely need to warm up before crushing this weak little creature. Then he could return to being the undisputed champion of the galaxy, with another victory to add to his perfect record. He had no idea that everything he believed about strength, fighting, and survival was about to change forever. The next morning, Zektar woke up feeling relaxed and happy. He had slept well, dreaming about his easy victory. His servants brought him a light breakfast of fresh meat and sweet fruits. He did not want to eat too much before the fight, but not because he was worried. He just did not want to feel heavy when he was showing off for the crowd. His trainer, an old Kethron warrior named Vextok, tried to get him to do warm-up exercises, but Zektar waved him away with one of his forearms. Save your energy for real opponents, Zektar said, stretching lazily on his sleeping platform. This human will be finished before I even break a sweat. I might not even need to use all four arms. Vextok looked worried. You should never take any fighter lightly. Champion, even the weakest opponent can surprise you if you are not careful. Zektar laughed at his trainer's concern. Have you seen this human? She looks like she would lose a fight with a strong breeze. The betting houses are giving 50-1 odds against her. Even the other humans are not putting money on their own fighter. But Vextok had been training fighters for many years, and he had learned to trust his instincts. Something about the human female bothered him, though he could not say what it was. She had been too calm yesterday, too quiet. Most fighters either boasted about their skills or showed fear before a big match. Lisa Carter had done neither. Just be ready for anything, the old trainer said. I have a strange feeling about this fight. Zektar ignored the warning and spent the morning relaxing in his luxury suite. He watched entertainment programs from different worlds and even took a long hot bath. When it was time to go to the arena, he felt completely refreshed and confident. The arena was packed with even more spectators than the day before. Word had spread across the galaxy about the strange match between the unbeatable champion and the weak human. Most beings had come to watch Zektar destroy another opponent, but some were curious to see what this new species could do. As Zektar entered the fighting area, the crowd roared their approval. He raised all four arms high and flexed his muscles, making his blue scales ripple in the bright lights. The cheering got even louder. This was what he lived for, the moment when thousands of beings recognized his power and skill. Lisa Carter entered from the opposite side of the arena. She looked exactly the same as yesterday, wearing simple fighting gear and carrying her basic plasma blade. Her face showed no emotion at all. She did not wave to the crowd or make any noise. She just walked quietly to her starting position and waited. The referee, a tall being with gray skin and 3 eyes, explained the rules one more time. Both fighters would use standard plasma blades that could cut through most materials, but were not deadly unless they hit vital spots. The fight would continue until one fighter could not get up or surrendered. Medical teams were standing by in case of serious injury. Zektar barely listened to the rules. He had heard them hundreds of times before. Instead, he stared at Lisa Carter and tried to figure out how to make the fight last longer than 30 seconds. The crowd wanted a good show, and destroying her too quickly might disappoint them. The referee raised his hand. Fighters ready? Both. Zektar and Lisa nodded. Begin. Zektar exploded forward with incredible speed and power. His plan was simple. Charge straight at the human with all four arms extended and end the fight with one crushing blow. His claws were retracted since this was a blade-only match, but his fists were still strong enough to break bones. He covered the distance between them in less than 2 seconds, moving faster than most beings could follow. The crowd held its breath, expecting to see the human female go flying across the arena floor. But when Zektar reached the spot where Lisa had been standing, she was not there anymore. Confused, he spun around to find her. She had somehow moved to his left side without him seeing her do it. Before he could react, he felt 3 sharp impacts against his body. Pain shot through his nervous system like lightning bolts. Lisa had struck him 3 times with precise, calculated hits. She had not used her blade at all, just her small fists and fingers. But somehow she had found spots on his body that he did not even know were weak points. His left arm went numb, and his left leg felt shaky. Zektar stumbled backward, shocked and angry. How had this tiny creature hurt him? How had she moved so fast? How did she know where to hit him? What did you do to me? He demanded, flexing his left arm to get feeling back into it. Lisa did not answer. She was already moving again, circling him like a hunter stalking prey. Her brown eyes watched every part of his body, looking for something that Zektar could not understand. Furious now, Zektar attacked again. This time he was more careful, keeping track of where she was. He swung his plasma blade in wide arcs, trying to force her into a corner where she could not escape. But every time he thought he had her trapped, she found a way to slip past his attacks. Her fighting style was unlike anything he had ever seen. She did not try to match his strength or speed. Instead, she seemed to be using his own power against him. When he pushed forward, she pulled him off balance. When he swung his blade, she ducked under it and struck at his joints and nerve clusters. The crowd was getting excited now. They had expected to see their champion crush an easy opponent, but instead they were watching a real fight. Lisa Carter was not just surviving against Zektar. She was actually making him work hard for every advantage. Zektar began to sweat as the fight continued. His breathing got heavier, and his muscles started to ache. This was not supposed to happen. He was the champion, the perfect warrior, the unbeatable fighter. But this small human was making him struggle like he had not struggled in years. Lisa moved like water, flowing around his attacks and striking back when he least expected it. She seemed to know his body better than he did, finding pressure points and weak spots that no opponent had ever discovered before. Every hit she landed sent waves of pain or numbness through his system. But Zektar was still bigger and stronger. Slowly, using his superior reach and endurance, he began to wear her down. Lisa was fast and skilled, but she was still just one small human fighting a much larger opponent. Her breathing became harder, and her movements got slightly slower. Turning point came when Zektar finally managed to land a solid hit with his plasma blade. The energy weapon caught Lisa across her left shoulder, spinning her around and sending her crashing to the arena floor. The crowd gasped as she rolled away from his follow-up attack, a line of blood showing where the blade had cut through her protective gear. Zektar pressed his advantage, using all four arms to rain down attacks from multiple directions. Lisa blocked what she could and dodged the rest, but she was clearly hurt now. Her left arm was not working properly, and she was breathing very hard. Finally, Zektar caught her with a powerful blow from two of his fists at the same time. Lisa flew backward and hit the arena wall with a loud crash. She slid down to the floor and did not get up immediately. The referee began counting. 1, 2, 3. Zektar raised his arms in victory, expecting the fight to be over. But at the count of 7, Lisa Carter pushed herself back to her feet. Blood trickled from a cut above her eye, and her left arm hung at an awkward angle, but her brown eyes still showed determination. Fight continues, the referee announced. Zektar could not believe it. Any other opponent would have stayed down after taking that much damage, but this human just kept getting back up no matter how hard he hit her. The final exchange lasted only a few more minutes. Lisa was too injured to keep up her earlier pace, and Zektar was able to land several more solid hits. When she finally fell and could not get up before the count of 10, Zektar was declared the winner. But as he stood over his defeated opponent, breathing hard and covered in sweat, Zektar did not feel like a champion. His body ached in places where Lisa had struck him. His left arm was still partially numb. Several of his scales were cracked, and he had been forced to use fighting techniques that he usually saved for only the most dangerous opponents. The crowd was cheering for him, but their cheers sounded different than usual. They had not just watched him destroy another weak challenger. They had watched him survive a real fight against an opponent who had nearly beaten him. Lisa Carter was helped to her feet by the medical team. Despite her injuries, she walked over to where Zektar stood. She extended her right hand toward him in what he recognized as a human gesture of respect. "Good fight," she said simply, her voice calm despite the pain she must have been feeling. Zektar stared at her extended hand for a long moment. In all his years as champion, no defeated opponent had ever approached him like this. Most either crawled away in shame or had to be carried away unconscious. Slowly, he reached out with one of his four hands and grasped her much smaller one. "Good fight," he repeated, though the words felt strange in his mouth. As Lisa Carter was escorted to the medical bay, Zektar remained in the arena, accepting the cheers of the crowd. He had won, just as everyone expected. His record remained perfect, and he was still the undefeated champion. But something had changed. For the first time in 3 years, Zektar had been challenged by an opponent he had completely underestimated. This small, weak-looking human had nearly beaten him, using skills and techniques he did not understand. That night, Zektar lay on his sleeping platform staring at the ceiling of his luxury suite. His body was sore in places he had forgotten could hurt. The medical team had treated his injuries, but they could not heal the confusion in his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lisa Carter moving around his attacks like she could predict what he was going to do before he did it. He had won the fight, but it did not feel like victory. For 3 years, he had dominated every opponent with ease. Other fighters feared him before they even stepped into the arena. But this small human had looked at him like he was just another problem to solve, not a terrible force to be afraid of. Her fighting style made no sense to him. She had not tried to overpower him or match his speed. Instead, she had fought like someone who expected to be smaller and weaker than her enemies. Every move she made seemed designed to survive rather than to win quickly. It was the strangest thing Zektar had ever experienced in combat. Unable to rest, he got up and walked to the large window of his suite. Outside, he could see the lights of the space station stretching in all directions. Beings from hundreds of worlds lived and worked here, but most areas were separated by species. The humans had been given a small section near the outer rim, reflecting their recent arrival to galactic society. Zektar made a decision that surprised even himself. He was going to visit the human quarters and ask Lisa Carter directly about her fighting methods. His pride told him this was a mistake, that a champion should not seek answers from a defeated opponent, but his curiosity was stronger than his pride. The human section of the station was much smaller than the areas given to older galactic species. The corridors were narrow and the rooms looked basic compared to his luxury suite, but everything was clean and well organized. Zektar had to duck his head to avoid hitting the low ceiling as he walked. He found Lisa Carter in a common room, with several other humans. She was sitting in a simple chair with her left arm in a medical wrap. The cut above her eye had been sealed with healing gel, but she still looked tired from their fight. When she saw him enter the room, she did not seem surprised or afraid. "Zektar," she said with a small nod. "I wondered if you might come by." The other humans in the room turned to look at him. Zektar felt awkward suddenly. He was used to beings either fearing him or worshipping him. These humans just looked at him with calm interest, like he was a neighbor who had dropped by to visit. "I wish to understand," Zektar said, his voice sounding too loud in the quiet room. "Your fighting style is unlike anything I have seen before. Where did you learn to fight like that?" Lisa smiled slightly. "From my grandfather," she said. "He taught me what his grandfather taught him, and so on back through many generations." "Your grandfather was a warrior?" An older human male sitting nearby chuckled softly. The others had introduced him as Jack Morrison, a former military officer. Lisa's great-great-grandfather was at a place called Normandy Beach. Her great-grandfather survived something called the Pacific Theater. Her grandfather made it through Korea, and her father came home from Vietnam. She carries forward what they learned about staying alive when everything goes wrong. These names meant nothing to Zektar, but the way the humans spoke about them suggested they were important battles. "These were wars among your own species?" "Among others," Lisa confirmed. "Humans have been fighting for survival for most of our history. We learned that in a real fight, the one who wins is not always the strongest or the fastest. It is the one who refuses to give up, who adapts to any situation, and who uses every advantage they can find." Zektar felt his warrior pride rise up, like heat in his chest. "The Kethran have conquered 12 worlds. We are no strangers to warfare." "I am sure you have won many battles," Lisa replied without any hint of insult in her voice. "But have you ever fought a war where your entire species faced complete destruction? Where you had to learn to fight not just other warriors, but whole armies? Harsh environments, disease, starvation, and odds so bad that most rational beings would just give up?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Zektar had no answer because the Kethran had always been the stronger side in their wars. They had conquered weaker species and taken their worlds, but they had never faced extinction themselves. A younger human named Pete Williams spoke up. "My ancestor fought in something called the Civil War. Brother against brother across our whole continent. 600,000 people died in 4 years, and that was just one war fought with weapons that seem like toys compared to what we have now." 600,000? Zektar repeated. The number seemed impossible. "In one war?" "One war," Pete confirmed. "And that was not even our worst one." Jack Morrison leaned forward in his chair. "Let me tell you about a battle called Stalingrad. 2 million casualties. The city was bombed to rubble, but the people kept fighting in the ruins for months. They ate leather and tree bark to survive. They fought in sewers and collapsed buildings. The temperature dropped so low that weapons would freeze and break. But they held the city." Zektar tried to imagine fighting for months in a frozen, destroyed city while slowly starving to death. It sounded like madness, not warfare. Why did they not surrender? Any reasonable commander would have retreated to fight another day. "Because there was no other day," Jack said quietly. "If they lost that city, their entire nation would fall. So they fought with everything they had, even when they had almost nothing left." An elderly human female named Mary Johnson had been listening, quietly from her chair near the window. Now she spoke in a voice that was soft but somehow made everyone else stop talking. My grandmother survived something called the Holocaust, she said. It was when humans decided to murder millions of other humans just because they were different. My grandmother was in a prison camp where they worked people to death and killed anyone who was too weak to work. When the Allied armies finally freed her, she weighed 70 pounds and looked like a skeleton. Mary paused and looked directly at Zektar, with eyes that seemed much older than her face. But she survived. And after the war, she got married and had children and taught them how to survive too. Every human alive today is descended from someone who made it through something that should have killed them. Zektar felt something cold move through his body. Why do you tell me these stories? He asked. These sound like defeats, like failures, of your species. Mary shook her head slowly. These are not stories of defeat, these are stories of endurance. We are not the strongest species in the galaxy, or the fastest or the smartest, but we are the species that refuses to quit, no matter how bad things get. Lisa Carter nodded. That is what you felt when we fought. Not just my training, but the knowledge passed down from generations of people who learned that survival is not about being the best warrior. It is about being the warrior who is still standing when everything else has fallen down. Another human, a middle-aged woman named Carol Davis, joined the conversation. My family comes from a place that had earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, and droughts. Every few years, something would destroy everything they had built. But they would always rebuild, stronger than before. They learned that you do not fight nature by being tougher than a hurricane. You fight it by bending without breaking, by adapting, by finding ways to survive that nature has not thought of yet. Zektar listened to story after story. Wars where humans fought other humans with primitive weapons that killed millions, natural disasters that wiped out entire cities, diseases that killed 1 out of every 3 people, economic collapses that left families with nothing, political systems that turned neighbors into enemies overnight. But in every story, some humans had found ways to survive. They had adapted, cooperated, sacrificed for each other, and refused to give up even when giving up seemed like the only rational choice. We had to learn to fight differently, Lisa explained. When you are usually the smaller, weaker side, you cannot win by being stronger than your enemy. You have to be smarter, more determined, and more willing to do whatever it takes to survive. Jack Morrison stood up and walked to a wall display showing images from human history. Look at this, he said, pointing to a picture of soldiers in a frozen forest. This is from a battle called the Bulge. These men were surrounded by enemy forces in the middle of winter. They were outnumbered, running out of food and ammunition, and freezing to death. When the enemy commander demanded their surrender, their general sent back a one-word reply. What did he say? Zektar asked. Nuts, Jack said with a grin. Zektar did not understand. Nuts? It means no, Lisa explained. It means we are not giving up, no matter how hopeless things look. It means you will have to kill every last one of us if you want to win. As the hours passed, Zektar heard more stories than he could count. Humans who had walked across frozen mountains to escape war. Mothers who had hidden their children for years to protect them from enemies. Scientists who had worked in secret to develop weapons that could stop invading armies. Ordinary people who had risked everything to help strangers they would never see again. What struck him most was not the size of the battles or the number of casualties. It was the way humans seemed to find strength in hopeless situations. Over the next few days, Zektar found himself returning to the human quarters again and again. Each visit brought new stories that shattered more of his beliefs about warfare and strength. The humans seemed happy to share their history, though. He was beginning to understand it was not from pride, but from a deep need to be understood by other species. On his 3rd visit, Jack Morrison told him about a siege that lasted almost 900 days. The city was called Leningrad, Jack explained. Sitting in the same chair where Zektar had first met him, the enemy surrounded it completely. No food could get in, no people could get out. Over 1 million civilians died from starvation and cold during those 900 days. Zektar tried to imagine a siege lasting that long. Most Kethran battles were decided in hours or days. Why did they not surrender? Surely death was preferable to such suffering. Because they knew that surrendering meant their entire culture would be destroyed, Jack replied. So they ate wallpaper paste and boiled leather shoes to make soup. They burned books and furniture to stay warm. Children learned to walk around dead bodies in the streets like they were rocks or trees. But the city never fell. A younger human named Danny Rodriguez joined their conversation. He had been listening quietly from across the room. My great-grandfather was in something called the Bataan Death March, Danny said. 60,000 prisoners forced to walk 65 miles in the jungle heat with no food or water. Thousands died along the way. Guards killed anyone who fell down or asked for help. How did he survive? Zektar asked. He said later that he survived by helping other prisoners, Danny explained. When someone fell, he would help them get back up. When someone was too weak to carry their pack, he would carry it for them. The guards beat him for it many times, but he kept doing it anyway. This made no sense to Zektar. But helping others would make him weaker. It would reduce his own chances of survival. Danny shook his head. That is where you are wrong. My great-grandfather said that helping others kept his mind focused on something besides his own suffering. It gave him a reason to keep going when he wanted to give up. And sometimes the people he helped were able to help him later when he needed it. An elderly man named Frank Wilson had been listening from his chair by the window. Now he spoke in a voice that was rough with age. I was in Vietnam, he said simply. Spent 13 months in the jungle fighting an enemy we could barely see. They knew the land better than we did. They had been fighting in those jungles for hundreds of years. We had better weapons and more soldiers, but they had something we could not defeat. What was that? Zektar asked. Time, Frank said. They could wait. They could lose 100 battles and still win the war because they were fighting for their home. And we were fighting because politicians told us to. They knew that eventually we would get tired and leave. And they were right. Lisa Carter, who had been quietly working on some kind of small device, looked up from her task. That is another thing humans learned about warfare. Sometimes the side that wins is not the side with the best army. It is the side that can keep fighting the longest. Over the following days, Zektar heard stories that challenged every assumption he had ever made about combat and survival. Carol Davis told him about the Trail of Tears, where an entire population was forced to walk thousands of miles in winter, and how some families had managed to keep their children alive by sharing what little food they had. Pete Williams shared the story of the Underground Railroad where humans risked their lives to help other humans escape slavery. They could have been killed if they were caught, Pete explained, but they did it anyway because they believed it was right. Mary Johnson told him more about the Holocaust, about people who had hidden Jewish families in their homes for years, knowing they would be executed if discovered. They had nothing to gain and everything to lose, she said, but they did it because they could not stand by and watch innocent people die. Each story revealed the same pattern: humans faced with impossible situations who found ways to survive, not through superior strength or weapons, but through determination, cooperation, and an absolute refusal to give up hope. They fought not just with their bodies, but with their minds and spirits. But it was a conversation with a quiet woman named Ruth Baker that truly changed how Zektar thought about strength and survival. Ruth had said very little during his previous visits, but today she was alone in the common room, reading from a small book. What are you reading? Zektar asked, settling into a chair that was too small for his large frame. Ruth looked up with tired eyes. Letters from my ancestor who fought in World War I, she said. He wrote to his wife from the trenches in France. Trenches. Long ditches dug in the ground, Ruth explained. Soldiers lived in them for months while enemies shot at each other across a strip of land called no man's land. Sometimes they would fight for weeks just to move the battle line a few hundred yards. Zektar could not imagine such warfare. It sounded like madness. Why did they not simply charge forward and end the battle quickly? Ruth showed him a picture from her book. It showed a landscape that looked like the surface of a dead moon, full of holes and mud and broken trees. Because charging forward meant certain death. Machine guns could kill hundreds of men in minutes, so they learned to fight differently. They learned to survive in conditions that would have killed their grandfathers. She read from one of the letters. My darling wife, today we advanced 50 yards at the cost of 200 men. Tomorrow we will try to advance 50 more. I know, this seems like madness, but we fight not for the 50 yards of mud, but for the world our children will inherit. He knew he might die for almost no gain, Ruth continued. But he kept fighting anyway because he believed his sacrifice would help create a better future for people he would never meet. This concept was completely foreign to Zektar. Kethran warriors fought for glory, for conquest, for personal honor. They did not fight for abstract concepts like the future or for people they did not know. How many humans died in this war? He asked. About 17 million, Ruth said quietly. The number hit Zektar like a physical blow. 17 million. Deaths in a single war, fought mostly with primitive weapons. The entire Kethran population was only about 50 million. Over the next few days he learned about World War II, which had killed even more people. He heard about the atomic bombs that could destroy entire cities in seconds. He learned about the Cold War, where two human nations had pointed thousands of nuclear weapons at each other for decades, knowing that one mistake could end their entire civilization. You could have destroyed yourselves completely, Zektar said to Jack Morrison during one of their conversations. Why did you not? Because we learned something important, Jack replied. We learned that being able to destroy your enemy is not the same thing as being willing to destroy yourself. The strongest warrior is not the one who can kill the most people. It is the one who knows when not to fight. Lisa Carter had been listening to their conversation while exercising her injured arm. The medical treatment was working well, and she was almost back to full strength. That is why human military training focuses so much on discipline and control, she said. We do not just teach people how to fight, we teach them how to think, how to make good decisions under pressure, how to work together even when they are afraid. Your soldiers are taught to think? Zektar asked. This was another foreign concept. Kethran warriors were taught to follow orders and fight bravely. Individual thinking was often seen as a weakness. Every human soldier is trained to lead, Jack explained, because in real combat officers die, communication breaks down, plans fall apart. When that happens, the lowest-ranking soldier might have to make decisions that affect the entire battle. Danny Rodriguez nodded. My drill sergeant used to say that an army of sheep led by a lion will always lose to an army of lions led by a sheep. He meant that having smart, independent soldiers is more important than having brilliant generals. This conversation led to stories about small groups of humans who had accomplished impossible things. A few dozen soldiers holding off entire armies, pilots flying damaged aircraft hundreds of miles to bring back important information, medics running into enemy fire to save wounded soldiers from both sides of a battle. What amazed Zektar most was how often these heroes were ordinary people, who had never expected to do anything special. A farmer who became a sniper, a teacher who learned to defuse bombs, a cook who ended up leading a battalion after all the officers were killed. We learned that heroes are not born, Carol Davis explained. They are ordinary people who find themselves in extraordinary situations and decide to do the right thing, no matter what it costs them. As the days passed, Zektar began to understand that human warfare was not really about fighting at all. It was about survival, adaptation, cooperation, and the willingness to sacrifice for something greater than yourself. Humans had learned to fight not because they enjoyed violence, but because they had been forced to develop these skills in order to survive in a dangerous universe. Your species has been at war for thousands of years, he said to Lisa during one of their conversations. How do you live with so much violence and death? The rematch was scheduled for exactly 1 month after their first fight. During those weeks, Zektar found himself thinking more about human history than about combat training. His old trainer, Vextok, became worried when he saw the champion, spending less time practicing and more time reading about human battles from something called Earth's Ancient History. You are different, Vextok said one morning as Zektar sat reading about a battle called Thermopylae, where 300 Spartan warriors had held off an army of thousands. Your mind is somewhere else. This is not how a champion prepares. For a fight. Zektar looked up from the display screen. Did you know that these humans once had a battle where 300 fighters held a mountain pass against an army of maybe 100,000 enemies? They knew they would all die, but they fought anyway to give their city time to prepare its defenses. That sounds like foolish suicide, Vextalk replied. A smart warrior retreats to fight another day. But they did not retreat, Zektar said, his voice filled with something like wonder. They stood their ground because they believed their sacrifice would save their people, and it worked. The delay they created allowed their allies to prepare, and eventually the larger army was defeated. Vextalk shook his head in confusion. You are thinking like these humans now. That is dangerous for a Kethran warrior. We fight to win, not to die for abstract ideas. But Zektar had moved beyond such simple thinking. He had spent hours learning about human battles where small groups had accomplished impossible things, through determination and teamwork. He read about a place called Rourke's Drift, where 150 soldiers had defended a small outpost against 4,000 attackers. He studied the siege of the Alamo, where less than 200 defenders had held off an army of thousands. What fascinated him was not just that humans had fought against such odds, but that they had often found ways to win or at least achieve their larger goals even when individual battles were lost. They seemed to understand something about warfare that went far beyond simple combat skills. As the day of the rematch approached, Zektar noticed changes in himself that went deeper than just new knowledge. He found himself questioning things he had never questioned before. Was being the strongest fighter really the most important thing? Was winning at any cost truly honorable? What was the point of being a champion if you never fought for anything beyond personal glory? The night before the fight, he visited the human quarters one last time. Lisa Carter was there as he had expected. Her injuries had healed completely and she looked stronger than before. But more importantly, she looked calm and ready, like someone who had accepted whatever outcome awaited her. Are you nervous about tomorrow? Zektar asked, settling into the chair that had become his usual spot during these visits. Lisa smiled slightly. A little, she admitted. But nervous is not the same as afraid. My great-grandfather once told my grandfather that courage is not the absence of fear. It is doing what needs to be done despite being afraid. Jack Morrison was also there, reading reports from Earth about how the first match had been received on the human homeworld. You know, he said to Zektar, win or lose tomorrow, Lisa has already accomplished something important. She showed the galaxy that humans do not give up easily. That message is worth more than any championship title. This perspective confused Zektar. But surely winning is important. What is the point of fighting if victory does not matter? Victory always matters, Lisa replied. But sometimes the real victory is not about who gets knocked down last. Sometimes it is about proving that you can stand up to any challenge, that you will not be intimidated or broken no matter what happens to you. Ruth Baker, the quiet woman, who had shown him the letters from World War I, spoke from her chair near the window. My ancestor wrote something in his final letter before he died in France. He said that he was not fighting to defeat the enemy army. He was fighting to prove that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are hopeless. As Zektar listened to their conversations that night, he realized that his understanding of combat had been transformed completely. These humans had taught him that true strength was not about overpowering opponents. It was about having the courage to fight for principles that were bigger than yourself, even when victory seemed impossible. The next morning, Zektar entered the arena with completely different expectations than he had brought to their first match. The crowd was even larger this time, with beings traveling from distant star systems to watch the rematch. The betting odds still favored him, but not by as much as before. Word had spread about how well the human had fought in their first encounter, but Zektar was no longer the same warrior who had entered this arena a month ago. He had spent weeks studying not just human military history, but human philosophy, about what it meant to be a warrior. He had learned about concepts like honor, sacrifice, and fighting for something greater than personal glory. When Lisa Carter entered from the opposite side, Zektar saw her with completely different eyes. He no longer saw a weak creature that he could easily defeat. He saw the end result of millions of years of evolution, shaped by constant struggle, where only the most adaptable, the most determined, and the most resourceful had survived to pass on their genes and knowledge. The referee gave the same instructions as before, but this time Zektar listened carefully. This was not just a fight between two individuals. This was a meeting between two completely different approaches to warfare, two different philosophies about what it meant to be strong. When the signal sounded, neither fighter charged forward immediately. They circled each other slowly, each one studying their opponent with new respect. Zektar had learned to fight like his human opponents had taught him, not just with strength and speed, but with intelligence and adaptability. The battle that followed was unlike anything the crowd had ever seen. Zektar no longer relied purely on his physical advantages. He had learned to think several moves ahead, to look for unconventional solutions, and to never assume the fight was over until his opponent stopped moving. But Lisa had also evolved. The month of additional training had sharpened her already impressive skills, and she fought with the confidence of someone who knew she was representing not just herself, but the accumulated wisdom of countless generations of human survivors. For nearly an hour, both fighters pushed themselves beyond their previous limits. Zektar used techniques he had learned from studying human military tactics. Lisa demonstrated new ways to use her smaller size and superior mobility. The crowd watched in amazed silence as their champion was forced to work harder than he had ever worked before. When the fight finally ended, Zektar had won again, but only by the smallest possible margin. Both fighters lay exhausted on the arena floor, having given everything they had to give. As they helped each other to their feet, breathing hard and covered in sweat, Zektar realized that something fundamental had changed inside him. He walked to the center of the arena and raised his hand for silence. The crowd, expecting a victory speech, quieted down to listen. "I have been champion of this arena for 3 years," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the huge space. "I believed that strength determined victory, that the superior warrior would always win. But I have learned something from these humans that has changed me forever." He turned to face Lisa Carter, then performed the deep bow that among his people indicated the highest possible respect. "I have learned that true strength is not about being the best fighter. It is about being the fighter who never gives up, who adapts to any situation, who fights not just for victory, but for something greater than themselves." The crowd began to murmur in confusion, but Zektar was not finished. "I withdraw from the championship," he announced, causing gasps throughout the arena. "Not in defeat, but because I have found something more valuable than victory. I have found respect for an opponent who has taught me what it truly means to be a warrior." The arena erupted in mixed reactions. Some beings cheered, understanding that they had witnessed something historic. Others booed, feeling cheated out of seeing their champion continue his domination. But Zektar no longer cared about the crowd's approval. He walked over to Lisa Carter and extended one of his 4 hands toward her. "Will you teach me more about human warfare?" he asked quietly, so only she could hear. Lisa smiled and grasped his much larger hand with both of hers. "I would be honored," she replied. As they left the arena together, Zektar felt no shame in his decision. He had entered this competition as a champion, but he was leaving as something far more valuable. A student who had learned that the most important battles were not always won by the strongest, but by those who refused to surrender their principles, even in the face of impossible odds. The humans had taught him that true strength was not about conquering others, but about conquering the part of yourself that wanted to give up when everything seemed hopeless. They had shown him that the greatest warriors were not those who won every fight, but those who fought for something worth fighting for. Years later, when other species asked Zektar about his time as champion, he would tell them that his greatest victory had not been winning fights in the arena.